Tonight on Bridge City News, both Canada and the United States have a warning about visiting the Caribbean island of Jamaica. We will explain why. Longtime federal Conservative MP Tony Clement had to step down as his party's justice critic following a sexting scandal. And we have part 3 of Fighting for Ezekiel. Hear about inconsistencies in the courtroom and critical information from medical and legal experts. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. If you're considering a winter getaway this year, you may want to be leery about visiting Jamaica. The U.S. State Department is apparently warning tourists about the Caribbean island nation. According to a recent report, over the past 7 years, 78 tourists have been raped in Jamaica, including a mentally handicapped woman in her 20s. Perhaps what is most alarming for tourists is that sexual assaults are occurring inside of the resorts. According to U.S. Embassy reports, 12 Americans were raped in Jamaica last year, and half of them inside of the resorts by hotel staff. No word yet if Canadians have been sexually assaulted, but the Government of Canada has a warning on its website to exercise a high degree of caution in Jamaica due to a high level of violent crime. Local travel agencies are urging Albertans to use a common sense approach when going on holidays.
Stay out of areas where you don't belong. You know, most often when people get into trouble, it's late at night. There's alcohol involved. They're out partying with the locals. They're somewhere that they wouldn't do at home here, and they shouldn't be doing there. We're most often going to less affluent countries when we're going into the warm, and Jamaica's definitely in that category. So leave your bling and your baubles at home.
Last year, Jamaica was ranked the 3rd most dangerous country for female travelers by Trip by Skyscanner, a California-based travel research company based in California. Egypt and Morocco top the list of the most dangerous countries. Canada Post is not the only group in a fight with their union. The University of Lethbridge bargaining team is seeking fair wages. The union is made up of university staff such as janitors, electricians, and librarians. They claim to have been in talks with the university for over a year, but still no progress. Susan Slate, Vice President of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees, wants the community to know just how much their situation impacts the people of Lethbridge.
Out of the 500 people that work for this university, most of them do live in Lethbridge, so they are contributing to the economy. They do pay taxes, and they are part of the Lethbridge community.
So for us to be out here and showing our support for our bargaining team is really important, because if the members aren't showing support, then the university's not going to believe that the support is actually there from our members. So to get a fair and decent contract, we need our members out, and that's all we want is a fair and decent contract. We're not asking for the moon.
This Thursday and Friday, there will be more meetings with the U of L to discuss the union's demands further. Streets Alive Mission is looking for warm clothing, boots, and winter items for their clothing bank as the temperature drops.
Right now, gloves. Toques that for their head, not brightly colored ones, more like blues or greens or whatever else. If you've got stuff at home, that's great. If you're looking to buy some stuff, Walmart's got great deals. Progress Clothing will always make a deal with you if you go in and tell them Streets Alive. We're looking to layer, so things like vests, or what I call hunter vests, those kinds of things, sweaters, hoodies, heavy fall jackets, those kinds of things are desperately needed for layering. And then footwear, something that'll keep their feet dry, okay? So boots and shoes that are kind of weatherproof. You can get some summer shoes that kind of step in the snow and they just get soaked.
Drop-off can be done directly at Streets Alive, or a pickup can be arranged by calling their office. Grade 7 students at GS Lakey got some hands-on learning experience today during their Skills Day.
The kids get exposure to some skills and activities that they may not learn about until they're older, or maybe they never learn about them, but it gives them an idea of some different options for career choices in the future.
I got to learn a little bit how a phone works and what's inside of a phone, and it was really cool.
Grade 7 Skills Day was implemented as part of the Alberta Education's curriculum standards to provide career and skill exploration opportunities for kids. 13 people have been arrested in connection with a child luring ring. Police say the bust was part of an 8-month investigation by Alert's Internet Child Exploitation Unit. The suspects faced a total of 69 charges, including allegedly trying to arrange sex with kids. The arrests took place in Edmonton, St. Albert, Wainwright, Drayton Valley, Fort Saskatchewan, and Barrie, Ontario. 3 suspects in the U.S. were also identified. Anyone with information about this investigation or any child exploitation offense is encouraged to contact local police or visit cybertip.ca. Alert was established and funded by the Government of Alberta to tackle serious and organized crime. This week, Bridge City News has been sharing an exclusive report on parental rights. Our documentary, Fighting for Ezekiel, surrounds the tragic story involving the sudden death of 19-month-old Ezekiel Stephan from what was believed to be meningitis. Parents David and Colette were charged and convicted for failing to provide the necessaries of life. David Stephan says he was surprised that the ambulance was ill-equipped to help his son.
We may have never even discovered that our son had gone for over 8 minutes without oxygen in the ambulance, because it would have been like finding a needle in a haystack in the medical files that were supplied to us.
There was no logs of anything. There was no lab reports. We've asked for them repeatedly.
When you see a coating of pus on top of someone's brain, that really does point much more toward bacterial meningitis.
What troubles me about lawsuits sometimes is you're trying to say we're bringing this lawsuit to make change, to help people. Well, you don't always have to sue for $8 million.
In part 3 of Fighting for Ezekiel, we will hear from the Stephan family on inconsistencies in the courtroom, and we will also hear from medical and legal experts concerning this case. If you missed parts 1 and 2, you can view them online anytime at bridgecitynews.ca. Conservative MP Tony Clement is resigning his post as his party's justice critic after admitting to sexting with another person online. Clement released a statement which says, "Over the last 3 weeks, I have shared sexually explicit images and a video of myself to someone who I believed was a consenting female recipient. The recipient was in fact an individual or party who targeted me for the purpose of financial extortion. The RCMP is currently investigating the matter to determine the identity of the party responsible for the extortion attempt." Clement, who twice sought the party's leadership and served in senior cabinet positions in the Harper government, will be resigning his position on a number of Commons committees. Clement, who is married, apologized to his colleagues and constituents, saying he let them down. He says he will also be seeking help and treatment to ensure this does not happen again. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer said while he's disappointed in Clement's actions, he's encouraged that Clement has decided to seek help. Andrew Scheer is calling on the federal government to cancel Stats Canada's request for the personal financial data of Canadians. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the personal information will be protected.
The Prime Minister has displayed outstanding capacity to be out of touch with Canadians on the issue with Stats Canada seizing personal financial data. But more and more experts are joining Canadians in their outrage at what this government is doing. A respected constitutional expert at the University of Waterloo said, "What a moral failure. The government has no more business looking at personal banking transactions than it has putting cameras in bedrooms." Will the Prime Minister do the right thing and stop this practice?
Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we take the privacy of Canadians very seriously, and so does Statistics Canada. In fact, Statistics Canada has been engaged with the Privacy Commissioner in regards to this pilot project, which has not yet been launched. We also understand the importance of quality and reliable data for Canadians. During 10 years, Conservatives ignored data and governed only through ideology. We witnessed the consequences: historically low economic growth while they were in power. We will continue to protect the privacy of Canadians and promote evidence-based policy.
Canada's Social Development Minister says the Fed's proposed anti-poverty law aims to make Canada a world leader in ending poverty. Jean-Yves Duclos made the announcement yesterday at an Ottawa food bank.
Our vision for Canada is to become a world leader in the eradication of poverty, a vision for a Canada without poverty. We understand that the road to achieving this ambitious goal will be a long one, and we have a lot of work to do to get there. For the first time in Canada's history, we will entrench into legislation an official measure of poverty, Canada's official poverty line. This measure is based on the income that is required to purchase the goods and services that Canadians require to have dignity and participate meaningfully in their communities. Some of you will know this measure as the market basket measure. Secondly, the bill would set into law ambitious but realistic poverty reduction targets. A 20% reduction in poverty by 2020, and B, a 50% reduction in poverty by 2050.
The numbers are in. Ottawa spent millions of dollars in purchasing new vehicles for the G7 summit, and now the feds are having a tough time selling those vehicles secondhand. Brian Lilly is one of our Ottawa contributors. Brian, how many vehicles are we talking about here?
They bought 631 vehicles for the G7. Now, you have to remember, this was a two-day summit. It was June 8th to June 9th, 2018. 2 days, they bought 631 vehicles. Now, the RCMP said, well, we did an analysis, and it was cheaper to buy these vehicles than to lease them for the full year. Who says you had to lease them for a full year?
Catch my full interview with the always colorful Brian Lilly coming up after business news. Alberta Premier Rachel Notley says she is disappointed that a Calgary MLA decided to break ranks with the NDP. Robin Luff was kicked out of caucus on Monday after she said backbenchers were told what to say, what questions to ask, and who they may be photographed with. Notley says it is not true, and she is proud of the people who work with her. She says they do so with integrity through good days and bad. A judge in Calgary has ordered former CFL running back Jerome Messam to make a personal appearance in court next week on a charge of voyeurism. The judge says it will be Messam's 8th court date, and he expects the former star to be there in person November 15th. Messam was a running back with the Calgary Stampeders at the time of the alleged offense in November of 2016. He was released by the Saskatchewan Roughriders when the team learned he had been charged. A 747 cargo plane went off the runway while landing in Halifax, Nova Scotia earlier today, shearing 2 engines. Authorities say the 4 crew on board the Skylease cargo plane were taken to hospital with minor injuries. U.S. President Donald Trump was a dominant force in the midterm elections. Attitudes towards the president influenced more than 60% of the voters. According to a recent survey, however, women voted mostly for Democratic candidates.
The latest we've learned from AP Votecast is that President Donald Trump was a dominant figure in American politics, and he's a dominant figure in these midterm elections. 6 in 10 voters or so told AP Votecast that they voted because either to support or to oppose Donald Trump. About 1/3 of voters said he didn't factor into their decisions, but more voters said that they voted to oppose Donald Trump than to support him. Voters give the president strong marks on the economy, but they give him poor marks on his temperament. And that's something we've seen in a lot of other surveys. We saw that in advance of 2016 when the president won the White House. They gave him poor marks on his temperament. So it'll be interesting to see over the course of the night what that actually does to those votes. So 2018 has been billed as the year of the women, and so all eyes are really on female voters this year. And what we've learned from AP Votecast right now is that there is certainly a gender gap in this election. Female voters voted far more in favor for the Democrat than for the Republican on a national level for the House candidates. If you look at the breakdown, we've seen that in year after year, but certainly in this election, that's a number that we're all looking for, and to maybe give us some indication where things are going to go. But right now, there is a significant gender gap for women voting for the Democrats.
Trump is warning House Democrats not to spend the remaining years of his presidency investigating him and his administration.
They want to do things. I keep hearing about investigations, fatigue, like almost from the time I announced I was going to run. They've been giving us this investigation fatigue. It's been a long time. They got nothing, zero. You know why? Because there is nothing. But they can play that game, but we can play it better. Because we have a thing called the United States Senate. And a lot of very questionable things were done between leaks of classified information and many other elements that should not have taken place. And all you're going to do is end up in back and forth and back and forth, and 2 years is going to go up, and we won't have done a thing.
We had more snow today, but good news, sunshine and warmer temperatures are on the way. I'll have all of the weather details coming up shortly. We had light flurries off and on today. Tonight, clearing with a low near -10. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with the mercury climbing to -3. Friday, even warmer under a partly cloudy sky and a high near 4. Saturday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 3 degrees. Remembrance Day Sunday, a chance of flurries developing again and a high of 0. Monday, the sunshine returns with a high near 8 degrees. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 6 degrees and an average low of -5. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1999 at 22 degrees, and the record low was a chilly -27 in 1973. Sunrise was at 7:30, sunset at 5 o'clock. Let's have a look at the national forecast for tomorrow now. Mainly sunny in Vancouver with a high expected near 9. Pretty much the same picture in Victoria. Calgary will be mainly sunny and a high of only -3. Edmonton will also be sunny with a high near -10. There's a chance of flurries developing in Regina tomorrow with a high of -9. Snow on the forecast for Saskatoon tomorrow and a high of -10. Winnipeg will also receive some snow and a high of -5. A mixture of sunshine and cloud in Toronto on Thursday with a high near 7. Ottawa will have light showers and a high of 7 as well. Montreal will have some rain and a high near 8 degrees. Over in the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be overcast at 9. Halifax, Nova Scotia will be mainly sunny at 9. Charlottetown, PEI will also have sunshine at 9 degrees. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, a good chance of showers tomorrow and a high near 7 degrees. Imperial Oil says construction will begin on the $2.6 billion Aspen Oil Sands project located northeast of Fort McMurray. The Aspen project is expected to produce about 75,000 barrels of bitumen per day once it is operational in 2022. It will use new oil sands recovery technology designed to lower water use and the intensity of greenhouse gas emissions by up to 25%. Imperial says the project is expected to create about 700 jobs during peak construction and more than 200 jobs during operations. ATB Financial has appointed a new board chair. She is Joan Hertz, a lawyer with close to 20 years of financial and governance experience. Hertz was first appointed to the ATB Financial Board in 2008 and served her full term, which ended in June of this year. The ATB Financial Board of Directors is comprised of the chair and 11 members. The new chair was selected following a recruitment process that included a public posting on the agency's recruitment website and the use of an external executive search firm. Hertz will be reporting to Finance Minister Joe Ceci. She'll provide leadership to the board, facilitate and develop work of the board, and oversee corporate governance. There are buyers interested in downgraded wheat that was hit by poor weather during this year's harvest. Officials with Left Field Commodity Research say number 2 and number 3 wheat will fill a void left by a higher amount of feed barley being sold for export. Lower quality spring wheat and some lower quality durum and oats will backfill for that barley. Officials say high protein wheat is not generating the usual price premiums. Warmer than normal temperatures in every major wheat producing country has led to ample supplies of the high protein crop. British Prime Minister Theresa May and European Council President Donald Tusk spoke by phone amid signs of movement in deadlocked Brexit talks. Tusk tweeted today that the pair took stock of progress in negotiations. Tusk has said he is willing to call a special EU summit if there's no movement from Britain on the issue of keeping an open Ireland-Northern Ireland border after Britain leaves the EU next year. May's cabinet is inching closer to a deal, but many ministers fear Britain will be locked into an EU customs union, limiting its ability to strike new trade deals around the world. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Canadian government and the U.S. State Department are warning tourists about visiting Jamaica. Ottawa says Canadians should use caution because of the Caribbean island nation's high degree of violent crime. The U.S. State Department says 12 Americans have been raped there in the past year, including more than half at resorts from hotel staff. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Ottawa recently announced that Canadian veterans and their families will be able to tap into millions more for services. One of our Ottawa contributors, Brian Lilly, asked the question, why did it take so long? That interview is coming up next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Check out the Pottery and Glass Art Christmas Sale being held from November 8th to the 10th, beginning at 10 a.m. at the Westminster Community Hall. Admission is free. Discover beautiful, unique gift ideas crafted by members of the Old Man River Potters Guild and the Lethbridge Society of Glass Artisans. Mom and Pop's Garage Sale is taking place Saturday, November 10th from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Come shop with local parents selling new and used kids items such as clothing, toys, baby gear, and more. Tables are available to anyone in the community for $25. To sign up for your table, call Michelle at 493-634-6565. And for more information, visit emmanuellutheran.ca. The Paw Society is holding an all-day event at Center Village Mall on November 10th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Come out and see all kinds of cat-themed paw giftware and Paw Prints coffee. A perfect Christmas gift for the cat lover in your life. For more information, call Paw at 403-328-6700. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
A resolution put forth by the NDP was passed in the House of Commons recently, which says that all money allocated to Veterans Affairs should be spent. That means veterans and their families will now have about an extra $124 million worth of services. Joining me now via Skype from Ottawa is our award-winning journalist, Brian Lilly. Brian, the extra money should reduce wait times and backlogs for veterans to finally receive some benefits.
Well, that's the hope, Hal, but let's face up to a couple of things here. One, Veterans Affairs Canada is a mess of a department, has been for a long time, despite some good work by, I'll credit the current minister, Seamus O'Regan. I'll credit the last Conservative minister, Aaron O'Toole, for doing good things in this department that has long been a mess. But why did they have $124 million in extra spending just lying around? And this isn't the first year. They consistently, year after year, don't spend the full allotment that Parliament gives them. This isn't unusual by departments. Many departments do this, and then the spending is just reabsorbed into the federal budget. Other departments, by the way, turn around and say, we're going to spend it all. And in fact, there was a story just a little while ago about one department, Industry Canada, deciding that they needed to get, I believe it was 65 it was 65-inch TVs, not 65 TVs, just a pile of 65-inch TVs costing in the tens of thousands of dollars. And they were all bought at the end of March, which is when their budgetary cycle ends. The new cycle begins on April 1st. It's known in Ottawa as March Madness. So there is a problem with how Veterans Affairs Canada is spending its money. Are they being allotted too much money? Is this money that they don't need in the areas that it's been allotted to, but they do need in other sections of the department? So this resolution just basically said any money that's left over goes back into these other areas. Well, why isn't the department doing that to begin with? We have to remember that just this week, this is a department that announced that they'd shortchanged 270,000 veterans $165 million over the last several years through bad payment plans on their pensions. They've been underpaying them. And so they've promised to rectify this. They're in the middle of bringing in a new pension plan that's going to cost billions more, but the Liberals say will save us money. So it's a confusing place over at Veterans Affairs Canada. This may sound like a good idea. I hope the money goes to the right place, but there's a reason that I'm skeptical, and it's just my long experience around the place.
Brian, the federal government spent around $23 million buying more than 600 brand new vehicles for the G7 summit, and now they're struggling to sell these vehicles secondhand. Maybe there's some good deals can be had, maybe on some Suburbans.
Oh, there's some great deals to be had. A Suburban, a Toyota Sienna. Do you want a 7 or 8 passenger minivan for your family, Hal? Because I can put you behind the wheel of one today for the great price of just $32,000. Maybe you're looking for a Ford Escape for just $21,500. We have it. If I sound like a used car salesman, that's because that's what the feds have become. They bought 631 vehicles for the G7. Now, you have to remember, this was a 2-day summit. It was June 8th to June 9th, 2018. 2 days, they bought 631 vehicles. Now, the RCMP said, well, we did an analysis, and it was cheaper to buy these vehicles than to lease them for the full year. Who says you had to lease them for a full year? I'm sure that you could have gone to any of the big automakers and said, look, we need this many big SUVs, we need this many minivans, we need this many sedans to ferry people around. Can you help us? But there's also this. 431 of those vehicles were for what was called motorcade duties. So shuffling around the leaders. All right, it's the G7. You've got 7 leaders and 431 vehicles for that? Give me a break. By the way, Donald Trump travels with his own motorcade. Every US president does. They always bring the beast, as they call the presidential limousine. They bring the beast with them wherever they go. Justin Trudeau could have driven his up from Ottawa to Charlevoix, Quebec. It's 4 or 5 hour drive. Just drive his own vehicle motorcade up. It's already tailor made for him. So now you're down to 5 leaders. Even if you add in all the observers, you've got 17 dignitaries. It works out to 20 and a half vehicles per dignitary, Hal. Tell me that that's not just a little bit of overkill. But do you like the price on those cars, though? Do you like the price? Because I can set you up.
Low mileage unit, love it. That's wonderful. Yeah, let me ask you something. When I worked on Parliament Hill, there was a rumor that Justin Trudeau at the time had this $1.5 million Mercedes sports car with the nice gull-wing doors. Was there any truth to that rumor? I never saw it. Have you ever seen the vehicle?
I have not seen it since he's become prime minister. He has been photographed driving around in it prior to that, including when he got married. It was his dad's Mercedes.
Right. Now, many Canadians were outraged to hear that the federal government has been tapping into our personal banking information. I can't afford a $1.5 million Mercedes. Brian, an update on the Stats Can data grab story is that the banks they're fighting back.
The banks are starting to fight back, which TransUnion, the credit bureau company, did not. So they may have some of your information. It depends on if you were one of the hundreds of thousands of Canadians that they grabbed all the credit reports for earlier this year. Now they want to take your banking information. The federal government's not backing down. The chief statistician says, well, we could delay maybe so that Canadians understand that we have to take their data, otherwise we can't give them good programs. But the Liberals are sticking with this line. They again this week in the House of Commons, under constant questioning from the Conservatives, they're comparing this to the fight over the law-informed census. I'm sorry. I don't care if you love the law-informed census or hate it. I think most Canadians see a huge difference between filling out a form that says how many people live in your house, how old the house is, when you last renovated, and giving over, without consent, every single financial transaction you have. They refuse to budge on taking this info. They refuse to budge on the consent side. Now, one of the updates that came this week was a privacy lawyer saying, look, this could actually jeopardize the Canada-European trade agreement because of the privacy provisions that the Europeans have brought in. They are much further ahead than we are. I tend to think that at times people will jump up and scream privacy too quickly, Hal. I don't on this one. This is the most intimate information that the government could lay its hands on. They want to do it without knowledge or consent. There is an official House of Commons petition on this. It's closing in on 20,000 signatures last I checked in just a few days. That is a remarkable speed. And talking to several people in the banking industry, hearing secondhand through others, they are being pounded by their customers, which is why the banks are starting to push back a little harder than they did before.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Brian, we received news that one-time Governor General Adrienne Clarkson has been called out for her spending habits. Brian, they may be a little higher than we originally thought.
This came to light because we provide a service, and we have since 1979, for every retiring Governor General, that they get help with certain office fees. And the idea is that if you still have duties that stem from your time in office, or you're called on to go to charitable events or help out, then you're incurring costs. And it's because you are a former Governor General and you're helping out a military charity or a children's charity, but you've got to fly across the country. That shouldn't be on you, and the taxpayer will look after that. Well, that's on top of their pension, though. We don't get to see what each of them are charging. And we don't know how much anybody else is charging unless they spend over $100,000 a year, in which case it shows up in the public accounts. And the only Governor General that has shown up in the public accounts in the last few years has been Adrienne Clarkson. In fact, going back to 1995, only one other Governor General former Governor General has done this, and that's the late Romeo LeBlanc, who was the father of the current cabinet minister, Dominic LeBlanc. He did this in 2 years, around 2008, 2009. Clarkson has been doing it year after year after year. And she says, well, I'm going to these events and I'm speaking. I'm sorry, she's on the Speakers Bureau, where people will make $10,000 and up for a speech. If you're being paid $10,000 for a speech, you're already drawing in a healthy pension from your time as Governor General. She's got another pension from her time at CBC. She really does like government money, doesn't she? Then she's billing more than 100,000. Some years we're now being told 200,000, and she defends it and says, "I'm still serving Canada." She's completely tone deaf on this issue. David Johnston, meanwhile, has said he will sign a form and make all of his expenses public so that people know. I don't begrudge them this, as I say, if it relates to their duties. But if it's just to pad your lifestyle, which is what I'm suspecting is going on with Adrian Clarkson, most Canadians are going to be more than a little upset at that.
Some MPs don't have the greatest of records when it comes to their attendance on Parliament Hill. Now, there's a Liberal MP who says his recent absence from the Hill was actually sanctioned by the Prime Minister. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is an MP that hasn't been seen in a while. He is from the Montreal area. He announced a little while ago that he is going to be retiring, and his name is Nicola Diorio. I just wanted to make sure I got that right. Nicola Diorio, and he says he's on a mission. I mean, he sounds like Jim Belushi and Dan Aykroyd in the Blues Brothers. I'm on a mission from God. Who are you on a mission from? And he said, well, the Prime Minister sent me on a mission. The Prime Minister has been asked, what's this mission about? Well, the Prime Minister's not saying just that he's doing work and, it's all good. Well, no, if you don't show up at the House of Commons, by the way, the House of Commons will dock you to a degree, but this guy's still going to be collecting, even with the financial penalties, this guy's going to be collecting a healthy salary until January. Why, if he doesn't want to be there, why not just quit now? You're not going to do the job. You're not going to show up. Quit now. Don't quit in January when it's comfy for you. Let your people get a new MP. This is playing around with taxpayers' money in a way that just annoys regular people who go, wait a minute, if I didn't show up from, I guess, last June when the House rose, and he hasn't really been seen this fall, if I didn't show up from June to January and still tried to collect my pay, my boss might have something to say about it. Well, the people are his boss. They just can't fire him at this point. And the PM, he's not doing anything about it.
Many Canadians were upset to hear that Tory Stafford's killer McClintock will be transferred from prison to a healing lodge in Saskatchewan. What's the latest there?
Well, the government is looking at ways of changing this. And Ralph Goodale is saying that they're going to make sure that there are processes in place to try and stop this. This is the government sounding like they might be learning. They were tone deaf on this for the longest time, and then would just say, we've asked them to look into this, asked Corrections Canada to look into this. They finally have, and how strict this is going to be, we don't know at this point. We've got to wait for details, but it is at least a hopeful sign. As I said at the beginning, I can think of past governments of the Liberal stripe that never would have done it this way. Jean Chrétien, upon hearing it, would have said, move that guy, fix it, which, by the way, Jean Chrétien did with a cop killer back in the 1990s when it was discovered that he was sent to a place that was called Club Fed out on Vancouver Island, one of these places complete with golf courses. The guy was moved within days.
Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is appointing a former dairy farmer and a longtime mayor in Quebec to run against Maxime Bernier in the 2019 federal election. That should be fun.
Yeah. Well, what it shows is that they're taking the threat of Bernier seriously. And so they want this guy to go in there, as you say, longtime mayor and a dairy farmer. He's the mayor of Saint-Elzire, Quebec, and his name is Richard Leroux. So he's going to be the candidate. They've appointed him, and the idea is take on Max, use the dairy farmers that are in the area. Maxime Bernier's been able to win. He's been very popular despite his stance on supply management, and they want to be able to knock off Bernier, who is being a bit of a thorn in their side. Now, does Bernier have the party apparatus to really take on the Conservatives in the next election? I'm not sure that he does. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to find 337 other people to run under his banner. And by the way, Bernier came out last week. He wants everyone to sign a pledge that you won't embarrass the party. Hello, Max. You embarrassed your own party, and that's why you're in the position that you're in. So it's a bit rich for Bernier to be doing that. If he is able to get some sort of infrastructure around him, though, he could be a real threat to the Conservatives, which is why they want this Richard Leroux, former mayor, to go in there. Guy who was mayor for 19 years while he was still farming, retired just a little while ago. It's going to be a tougher battle than Bernier was probably hoping for.
We only have a few short moments left here, but there's word that lobbyists are courting senators to kill the Impact Assessment Bill, otherwise known as Bill C-69, which we're not crazy about here in Alberta. Premier Rachel Notley has already said it does not work for our province.
You know, when you've got the Premier of Saskatchewan, Scott Moe, and the Premier of Alberta, Rachel Notley, agreeing that a bill is bad for the people of your region, that says something. They don't see eye to eye on a lot of politics. The head of the head of the Canadian Energy Pipeline Association said if this bill goes through, there will be no more major projects, and not just pipelines. He said mining, forestry, everything else. This is a sea change that will do more damage than the protesters blocking the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So there's lots of lobbyists in there, whether these so-called independent senators who vote more with Justin Trudeau's Liberals than the former Liberal senators do, I'm going to be skeptical. But let's hope. The Senate has done this sort of thing before. Let's hope that they have some common sense, even if they only send it back with amendments. That could delay it until after the next election.
Brian Lilly, thanks again for joining me once again via Skype from Ottawa.
Thank you.
Previously on Fighting for Ezekiel.
In a short period of time, it went from being just something of interest, like, is this something that we need to act on? Like, everything else is fine, to now he's not breathing.
911 emergency, require police fire ambulance.
Hi, yes, my son's not breathing.
By Thursday, they were diagnosing Ezekiel with having brain death. Upon receiving the autopsy report, that I became suspicious that they were going to lay charges. The amount of death threats that began flowing in immediately.
Death threats?
Death threats.
To you?
We've had over 300.
Oh my goodness.
You've got an ambulance service that they were made aware of the fact that they didn't have the proper equipment. They were made aware of that for over a year previous to my son's death. The Crown was trying to use our court case as a precedent-setting case wherein parents could be held criminally liable if they didn't vaccinate their children.
Would you label yourselves as anti-vaxxers?
I guess probably the best way to answer is, are we for vaccines? Absolutely not.
And now, part 3 of Fighting for Ezekiel, a Bridge City News exclusive.
Coming up in part 3 today, we're going to hear about missing medical records. Did the Crown withhold any evidence? Were there inconsistencies in the testimony of medical experts? Could it be that improperly equipped ambulances directly contributed to the death of Ezekiel? Medical records show that Ezekiel went without oxygen for about 8 minutes as a result of not having properly sized breathing equipment in the ambulance. One of the attending paramedics testified in court that ambulances did have the correct size apparatus the year before, but equipment had actually been removed because of miscommunication. Paramedics had repeatedly asked for the proper sized equipment to be restocked, but it apparently did not happen. The court heard that within a week after Ezekiel died, the ambulances finally received the correct equipment. Around that time, the government had also made changes in how ambulances were dispatched, switching from local oversight to using just one dispatch center in Calgary for all of southern Alberta. Is it possible that Ezekiel would have survived if dispatchers had called the volunteer manned ambulance from Glenwood instead of the ambulance from Cardston?
Unbeknownst to us at the time, there's an ambulance in Glenwood.
So this is right close to where you were, like?
We're by the time we got on the phone with 911, we're probably 2.5 miles, 3 miles out of Glenwood is where we're at. And we're heading towards Glenwood. And we ended up driving through Glenwood within about 100 meters of where that ambulance is housed.
So ideally, in an ideal world, the dispatch would have said, Glenwood, go meet the Steffens and get this child some help.
Within minutes of him stopping breathing and CPR being commenced, we could have had an ambulance right there. It was on a Tuesday night. That's the night that they do their trainings. It would have been at about the point where they're starting to close up their trainings. I've actually gone and done some trainings with them and been there when they dispatched. So they were likely already in the building that day, ready to go.
We asked a legal expert, criminal defense lawyer Ari Goldkind, if there's potentially a case here for a lawsuit against Alberta Health Services. Ari, what are your thoughts?
There's two elements to this answer. One, sometimes lawsuits, as unseemly as they are or as greedy for money as they may be, will lead to a positive change that could help people down the road, whether it be in Alberta or throughout the country. What troubles me about lawsuits sometimes is you're trying to say we're bringing this lawsuit to make change, to help people. Well, you don't always have to sue for $8 million. You can actually sue for $1 and an agreement that the ambulance services, the emergency response teams, will have this equipment. So I get uncomfortable with lawsuits, but if it makes the ambulance division of public safety decide to put these things in an ambulance, it's fine. Where the lawsuit to me would have more meat on the bone, to put it very succinctly, is if Alberta EMT said, no, we're not going to do this because maybe it's too expensive or an extra buck or two, then to me a lawsuit has more merit.
The Steffens say that from the time the ambulance crew turned care of Ezekiel over to the Lethbridge Hospital until Stars Air Ambulance flew to Calgary, there's over an hour of time where there was no medical logs for Ezekiel's care. Another discovery was made that after the first trial and the guilty verdict, there were apparently over 100 pages of medical files missing. Paul Arthur talked with both David Steffen and his brother Brad regarding the issue.
My understanding is that the legal team later tried to get the records from the hospital in Lethbridge.
In Lethbridge, he had checked into the hospital and they had taken an x-ray, and then they released him an hour and a half later. And the Stars ambulance team was there on arrival. They all met in Lethbridge, and they still hadn't transported him for an hour and a half, but there was no records other than this x-ray.
So during this time, this entire time he's in Lethbridge at the hospital, there's no record of what treatment was given, how Ezekiel was doing?
No. There was no actual logs of the drugs he was given, of any of the things that took place in Lethbridge. There was no logs of anything. There was no lab reports. We've asked for them repeatedly. And
now, what kind of response are you getting from Alberta Health Services? Are they saying these logs simply don't exist, or we lost them, or they were destroyed? What are they saying?
Well, the last one I got was a letter from, I believe it was Connie Firth at the Lethbridge Regional Hospital, or Chinook Regional Hospital now. And she just said, we don't have them. Documents I can provide you later. And what we had done is we went through the notes of these doctors where they had noted some lab reports, some events that took place, things like that. And we handed them off to them and said, look, find us the corresponding medical documents for these. They don't exist. She said, I can't help you.
And this is missing?
It seems to be scrubbed. And so the second time that we went there, we were pretty adamant about that, saying, you know, there's records because they're being referenced from other medical records, so they must be in existence. And there was nothing.
So to this date, as of this interview, that has not been produced?
That's correct.
I understand, again, this is after the trial when you learned that, oh, hold on a second, it seems like we're missing some evidence here. So I understand you made a FOIP request?
So yeah, there were a number of requests that were made. Initially, we went to Cardston to see if we could get the x-ray. We went to Lethbridge to see if we could get that x-ray. And then we went to Calgary to see if we could get the entire file. And, you know, what we found was that there were roughly 137 pages of missing documentation.
And you did get those then from
We
Alberta
got
Health Services? Okay.
And that's what this stack represents right here, is the stack of documents that we didn't have.
So this was, you did not have access to this for the first trial?
No.
David's brother Brad also began to notice some inconsistencies in the testimonies of medical experts when compared to the actual medical records.
You've got a lab report here, and what you see is that no growth was found. They had initially thought there was heavy gram-negative bacilli, but then they looked it over before the final report, and what they found was that there was no gram-negative bacilli. It was debris. It was from the cells that were dying off from the hypoxic injury. Well, this was sent to the medical examiner, and within 45 minutes of receiving that report, he gives Wilson Chan with Calgary Laboratory Services, the microbiologist, on the report, a call and says, you need to find the bacteria. Well, they had just received a report that said there was no bacteria, so what's he looking for? He's attempting to negotiate a result. So the response to it is a revised final report where they then say, disregard that. We found some scant negative bacilli. So then what happens is we see this email. And the interesting thing about this email is that it discusses a test that there are no lab reports, there are no protocols, there's nothing to back up. It doesn't exist. They lost them.
They lost the tests.
Apparently, they're all lost. So in trying to find them, what we did is we sent in a request to Calgary Laboratory Services, and again, Wilson Chan. And what we found was that they have no records of any email communications. Well, that email that doesn't exist, according to this letter.
You have it on file here.
I have it on file, and it was a key piece of evidence in the court case. So now you've got a lab report that says there wasn't any bacteria. You've got a call made to them saying you need to find bacteria. And then you've got a revised report saying, okay, there was a little bit of bacteria. And then an email saying that they found it through a non-clinical test that can't be used clinically anyways. And then you have a letter saying
that there were no emails.
There were no emails. I mean, you connect the dots on this one, it's getting a little shady here. So then you've got Dr. Adiego, and you know, he's saying something interesting in his testimony. He's saying that there was growth, that they actually were able to culture gram-negative bacilli. Well, that's kind of interesting because in these lab reports, they all say the same thing. No growth after 4 days, final report. Even the revised lab report says no growth after 4 days. When Dr. Adiego was questioned as to why he didn't include in the report the hypoxic event from the ambulance, let me read it to you. It's not about memory. He didn't forget that the ambulance issue happened. It's about me only trying to write positive things. That's my style at the time. So in essence, what he was doing here was he was admitting on the stand that he was leaving out pertinent information from the autopsy report because he was only writing positive things. Well, positive things for who?
There was much courtroom debate between lawyers and medical experts on the autopsy report and the cause of death. Our team did invite medical experts testifying for the Crown and their legal team to take part in the series, but they either declined or did not return our calls and emails. The medical expert for the defense, forensic pathologist Dr. Annie Savageau, also declined an interview. However, she did testify in court that in her opinion, there was in fact viral meningitis present. She said it was not the cause of death, rather it was a medical misadventure.
Her report would have went as such if she was the one that was doing it, that he died because of medical misadventure.
So it was essentially the trip in the ambulance without the proper equipment that was the cause of death. You know, that is not, I would guess, a message that Alberta Health Services wants to hear, because that potentially puts them as being liable for the death of your son.
There's a major interest in trying to cover up medical misadventures because it's being exposed. So instead, they come up with the bacterial meningitis, dead upon arrival, nothing that we could do. You guys let him decline so bad that, you know, we're not going to even make mention of it. And had we not been made aware of it because of the local paramedics, we may have never even discovered that our son had gone for over 8 minutes without oxygen in the ambulance, because it would have been like finding a needle in a haystack in the medical files that were supplied to us. They withheld any of the evidence that would go in direct contradiction to what the autopsy report was listed to say.
So with the withheld evidence, is this referring to the X-ray that Dr. Annie Savageau brought up in the trial that apparently you weren't aware of beforehand?
That's right.
And this was not disclosed to the defense. Is that correct? This
That
is
is
an X-ray that was taken upon arrival at Cardston, I believe?
That's correct.
It would
And
show
then again at
totally clear
Lethbridge.
lungs.
Yeah, so Lethbridge and Cardston both did x-rays during transport, and he had clear lungs, no right pleural empyema, and those x-rays were withheld. And we wouldn't have been made aware of them unless Annie Savageau went into the medical examiner's office and discovered that. And the interesting thing is you know, we get the initial set of disclosure, and we thought we had it all. And then during the preliminary trial in 2014, Dr. Adiabo starts mentioning or referring to certain documents that my lawyer discovered he didn't have. So then he put in another request for the entire medical examiner's file. And we got it, and we thought we had it. We thought we had it in its entirety, but we still didn't have those x-rays. And we don't know what else we didn't have. But Dr. Annie Savageau, when she went in, and she had this information, she had what the autopsy report stated, and she sees an x-ray that's in direct contradiction to one of the causations of death. And she says, "Are you aware that there's this x-ray? Do you have this?" No, we didn't.
Dr. Savageau's testimony clashed head-on with that of the Crown. She says her findings for the cause of death were the 8.5 minutes, again without oxygen, so a hypoxic injury to the brain swelling and so forth for your son Ezekiel. And I understand there was no medical evidence of bacterial meningitis, but there was for viral meningitis, which again is not fatal in and of itself. So how did that play out in the courtroom?
Well, they never came to a determination on it. When all that evidence was brought forward, which it never came out in its entirety, because Dr. Annie Savageau was actually largely muzzled, if you would. For the first time in her career of actually having testified at over 300 trials, for the first time, she was prevented from being able to present all of her facts, all of her discoveries. And so she never
Was there any particular reason given for that?
Yeah, it was the judge had come down with a ruling that she was not qualified to diagnose illnesses, which is interesting because the diagnosis of an illness, the discovering the causation of death is a diagnosis of sorts. So she wasn't able to discuss what likely led up to his death in regard to the illness that he had, because she would fall under what a medical doctor would, because she works with people that have died rather than people that are living.
So we have a conflict in the courtroom with differing opinions from medical experts for the Crown and the defense. It seems like a difficult task to get consensus on the actual cause of death. We invited Dr. Tina Tan to share her opinion on some of these questions. She's a professor of pediatrics at the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University and infectious disease physician at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. Dr. Tan, are you able to comment on the x-rays taken of Ezekiel? Does the medical evidence point conclusively to right pleural empyema and bacterial meningitis as the cause of death? Or could it just as easily have been caused by hypoxic injury?
So if you look at his x-rays, he definitely does have a fluid collection on the right side of his x-rays. Now, you're not going to know whether or not it's empyema at the time you see the x-ray until somebody either taps it, or unfortunately in this case, they did the autopsy and it did show that he had an empyema on the right side of his lung. But I don't think that's what resulted in his death. If you look at the autopsy, and this is just based on autopsy material, when you look at his brain, he really does have a layer of purulent material that covers the surface of his brain. And this is much more commonly seen in bacterial meningitis, not in viral meningitis. Now, I do understand that they didn't send off cultures, or cultures were sent, but they weren't sent off properly. But when you see a coating of pus on top of someone's brain, that really does point much more toward bacterial meningitis.
And the clear x-rays that were taken on the initial arrival, does that mean one thing, one way or the other?
It really doesn't. I mean, he can have a collection of fluid that may not be seen initially, and then on subsequent x-rays, you can see the collection of fluid, which he did have on some of those x-rays.
Coming up, we will hear more from pediatric specialist Dr. Tan as to what the cause of death likely was. We will also hear from Toronto criminal defense lawyer Ari Goldkind, weighing in on how the courts handle cases in which medical experts differ in their opinions on the cause of death. Join us for part 4 tomorrow.
Next time on Fighting for Ezekiel.
Well, one of the dangers, and this has been something that's talked about by a lot of defense lawyers throughout the years, is where judges pretend to be doctors.
Did Ezekiel die from a lack of oxygen to the brain, or was it bacterial meningitis?
And I think a lot of his distress was secondary to the fact that he did have a meningitis.
With contradictions in the courtroom, we'll learn what qualifies as perjury and what doesn't.
Perjury happens all the time in courts throughout Canada, and it's extraordinarily unfortunate that Crowns are so gun-shy, or I say actually gutless, to charge people for it.
Find out what happens in our courtrooms. This and more in part 4 of Fighting for Ezekiel.